All right, and we've got everything up and running on Facebook. Again, I want to welcome you all and thank you for joining us. If you're joining us today on Zoom, we're so glad to have you here today. And we do love to hear from you, so feel free to jump in the chat box and say hello to us and let us know where you're from. And if you're joining us on Facebook today, you can get in the comment section and you can say hello and let us know where you're from. We're going to get started in just about 1 minute, so welcome. Welcome, Lisa from Royce City ISD. So glad to have you. All right, I have 12:15, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to give our presenter as much time to share her wealth of information with you as possible. So again, welcome and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Strategies and Tips to Avoid the Summer Slide. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin, and I'm the Training and Evaluation Specialist with Partners Resource Network. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers, or PTIs. PTIs are funded through the Department of Education, Office of Special Education Programs. The 4 PTI projects in Texas are known as PACT, PATH, PACT and TEAM. Our mission at Partners Resource Network is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. And also joining us today from Partners Resource Network is our Director of Statewide Services, Christina Henning, our Support Specialist, Chelsea Rivas, and our Technology Specialist, Zach Hildago. If you're having any technical difficulties today, please reach out to Zach in the chat box and he can assist you. And for those of you that are needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for joining today's webinar. You can follow the link in the email to get your certificate of attendance. At the end of our presentation, we will have a time for question and answers. If you're joining us on Zoom, please type your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on Facebook, please type your questions in the comments. We are recording today's webinar, and the recording will be available on our website at prntexas.org and also on our Facebook page. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker and we'll get everything turned over to her. Today, our guest speaker is Dr. Michelle Simmons. Dr. Simmons is the Lana Hatton Professor of Learning Disabilities, the Director for the Center for Learning Disabilities, and an Associate Professor of Special Education in the Department of Education at West Texas A&M University. At WTAMU, Dr. Simmons teaches undergraduate special education preparation courses and graduate educational diagnostic courses. That is a mouthful, Dr. Simmons. And so we're going to turn it over to you. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to get to be with you all this afternoon. Real quick, I'm going to make sure that you guys are able to see my screen. And I do, as Stephanie mentioned, encourage your feedback and questions. So please post those in the chat box as we progress through the presentation, and I'll be more than happy to answer those at the conclusion. I did already note that someone asked about the relevant ages for this presentation, and it will be most applicable to kindergarten through a 12th grade or a senior in high school. So we are covering a pretty wide range today, but hopefully that will help you in knowing what to anticipate in terms of learner outcomes. So summer is approaching. It's an exciting time for all of us. I know our kids are counting down the days, but summer brings a lot of change, and especially for parents and caregivers, and our students, this can lead to anxiety and concerns, specifically in the area of continued academic progress. And so it is my hope that the time spent this afternoon will help you feel more confident as you prepare to transition into summertime. This presentation will specifically highlight what academic regression is, legal compliance in addressing extended school year services as it relates to IEP development, and then offer some practical tips and ready-to-use resources that hopefully you or whomever your child's primary caregiver is over the summer will be able to use. I first want to talk about academic regression. When considering academic regression from the perspective of an education setting, which is our intent today, I think it's important that we are aware of how the Texas Education Agency and the Texas Administrative Code addresses academic regression or defines it. And so basically, academic regression is evidence of loss of critical skills after an extended break from school. And so most typically, this is viewed as, Christmas break, spring break, or of course, summer break, which we're upon. And what I really want to highlight here when talking about the critical loss of skills, and this applies to all IEP development, oftentimes in developing an IEP as an IEP team, we really emphasize the academic side of things and academic services. But when we're considering the presence of academic regression, we want to give consideration to critical loss of skills that are not only academic, but are any skills that are required for success in the education setting. And so that does also include functional performance, adaptive behavior, and behavioral skills. When we think about academic regression, it is important to note that this extended break, this summertime, does lead to loss of skills potentially. And so I've just got a couple of resources I'll reference here, some important statistics to note. Students receiving special education services or with limited access to resources can lose up to 2.5 to 3 months of reading skills over the summer. And so you can imagine the impact that that has, especially on our students with learning differences in the area of dyslexia. Here's some information from a study done at Johns Hopkins University, but there are several problems that students can potentially face due to intellectual inactivity over the summer. Among these are learning loss of math computation skills. Of course, low-income children or children who have limited access to resources are more significantly impacted by the summer break. As I just stated before, it can lead to an achievement gap in reading performance. And then it also can lead to concerns or problems in the area or increased risk just regarding a child's basic needs, meaning that there can be decreased access to resources, common things like availability of meals, and there can be a potential increase in risk or danger due to some children having the inability to have available adult child care or supervision. So when we think about academic regression and how that relates to the IEP, I think it is really important, especially because many of you are a team member or offering support to a child who is currently receiving special education services, to discuss in the extended school year, or what y'all are, I'm sure, familiar with the term of ESY, and what role that plays in summer planning and addressing academic regression for a student. There is a place for ESY services. It needs to be considered at your annual IEP meetings if it's not part of the discussion. And for some students, the provision of ESY services are critical in their academic success during the regular academic calendar year. So I would encourage you, if you're not already having a discussion about, does my child, hopefully your IEP team meeting is following an agenda that gives consideration to, does my child exhibit need for for ESY services? But if they're not, ask that question at your annual IEP meeting, because legally we should be giving consideration to that. And so how are ESY services determined? Well, as I just stated, they're determined by the IEP committee, and there must be a quality IEP in place to determine if there is a need for ESY services. And so questions that the IEP committee should be asking is, will the student experience regression or loss of critical skills? And again, I would reiterate there, that's not just the loss of academic performance, but the loss of any critical skills that are required for successful academic performance. So again, if it's going to affect their behavioral functioning, their adaptive behavior, their functional skills, then we should be having a conversation about the progress that the student is making on those specific goals, not just their academic goals. And then if the student will lose critical skills over the extended break, will the time it takes for the student to recoup those skills be excessive in comparison to a non-disabled peer who experienced the same break? So for example, let's take 2 fourth grade students. The fourth grade student has a fourth grade student who's not receiving special education or 504 services, has summer break, and their end of year benchmark assessment indicates that they're performing at 85% proficiency in reading. And then, we have what's almost, 2 months and a couple weeks, we have the summer break. Then they come back and they do the same benchmark assessment at the start of the school year. And now we're performing at, let's say, 80% proficiency. So we can see that there's a loss there. But then with the continued academic instruction, they recover those skills within a couple weeks. And, they're back up to the 85% on that benchmark assessment. In contrast, perhaps the student receiving special education services takes the same benchmark assessment. They're performing at 85%, but then after the extended time or summer break, the loss of skills shows 80%, and it takes the whole first 6 weeks to recoup that academic progress of where they were at the end of their last academic school year. And so then that would be evidence or data to say, hey, we need to talk about, does this child need extended school year services in order to ensure that there's not such a significant loss, and it doesn't take so much time to recoup that loss when they start back at the next grade level. I've listed some resources here for you. One is one of y'all's own that PRN has provided, and then some guidance that TEA offers regarding extended school year services. And then this last resource, and all of these, hopefully, y'all, I see that they've provided the PDF of the presentation to you all. And so all of these embedded links should be directly clickable. But if for some reason you have to, because I've got quite a few resources embedded as we progress, any of you have trouble accessing those, please don't hesitate to contact me by email, and I would be glad to assist you with the resource if you're having trouble with it. But on this last one, the 5 pillars of the IEP, as I already started to talk about, a quality IEP has to be in place to determine the need for additional services. And that's not just extended school year services. When we think about related services, transportation, in-home training, transition support, all of those things, or transportation support, they require a quality IEP in order to determine if there's loss of progress and then there's additional need for the extra service. And much of that surrounds the development of the IEP goals and the progress the child is making toward the IEP goals. However, when I conduct family consultations, I frequently see a pattern that IEP goals are more generic, not individualized, or they're not measurable. And so if the IEP goal is not quality, meaning measurable and individualized, among other factors, which could be a whole nother presentation, then we can't determine if the child's making adequate progress because the bar we're using for determination isn't quality. And so in anticipation of an extended school year discussion, I would really encourage you to review, provide input, and give suggestions for revisions if needed on the development of your child's IEP goals, because that's where we're going to look and say, okay, if they're not making progress toward this IEP goal, then yes, we might need extended school year services over the summer break. And again, that could be a whole lunch presentation in and of itself. And so I would encourage you to check out this video on the 5 pillars of the IEP, because she has a whole lot of resources and information that she refers families to on the quality development of an IEP and IEP goals. So I've talked a little bit about the legal side of things. What is academic regression? How do we give consideration to extended school year services? And now I want to transition just into more practical tips and hopefully skills and tools that you can use throughout the summer in supporting your child. And I think that starts with behavior management. So whether your child will be at home full time with you, at some form of summer care, maybe that's childcare, summer camps, perhaps they're going to be with a family member, or somewhat independent periodically throughout the day, meaning staying by themselves for brief periods of time. The role of managing behavior makes a shift when we go from the school year to summer. And it makes that shift from, they were spending the majority of their time in school, thus the school was helping guide and support their behavior management. And now they're spending all of their time likely outside of school. And so the parent or the caregiver becomes the responsible party in facilitating and overseeing behavior management. And oftentimes this can be very stressful and challenging for parents because it's never ending sometimes. And I feel like nowadays the behavior management, although multifaceted, starts with the discussion about screen time. And I'll just provide just a few recommendations here. Again, this could be a whole nother presentation in and of itself, but I did want to get a few resources and practical tips into your hands, because inevitably with a child's increased time at home, screen time is going to be an increased responsibility. And so an organization that I really like, many of you are probably familiar with, is Common Sense Media. And this is a resource that can help you filter online content. And so using that link, you are able to check ratings and receive feedback on the quality, age appropriateness, description of various media, including like cell phone and tablet applications, movies, TV shows, video games. All of those are available through Common Sense Media. And so I highly recommend that. A few recommendations for screen time consumption are listed here. Start to think about it from the perspective of what category, how is my student spending their time on screens, and what category does it fit in? Is it passive, interactive? Is it communication-based, or is it content creation? And so the key here is the child consuming? And that's more of that, for adults, we sometimes call it doom scrolling, but more of that mindless just clicking or flipping. I know there are applications where the child is just, pushing a button, but there's no real intellectual challenge to create content. And so ask yourself, when you're trying to supervise and filter the child's screen time, are they consuming or creating? And do note that content creation provides greater intellectual stimulation and is less likely to lead to more primal behaviors. So in that regard, we would say that content creation might be a better way for the child to spend their time engaging in the device. And then an aside or a comment I would make about the communication category, be aware of communication, screen time, and the potential safety and mental health risks. This is an ongoing conversation that we have, that my husband and I have with our older child. And then I also encourage, students that I'm working with. The scenario that has been created for us as current parents nowadays is we're now responsible for the physical world that the child lives in and navigating all of those decisions and challenges. And as if that wasn't hard enough, now we're getting to throw the virtual world in there, and we're having to parent in what I call another realm. And it is exhausting. But I do have the conversation with the child, knowing that telling them, online communication is equivalent to the person sitting in the room with you. So ask yourself, would you, if mom and dad aren't home, or if I'm here with, a caregiver or family member, would I let a stranger or a group of strangers physically come through the front door of my house and sit down in the living room and have a conversation or play a game with me? And that kind of helps put it in a more tangible light or tangible perspective for the child, so that they understand the potential danger and risk of online social communication as it relates to screen time communication. And then in regards to screen time, pay attention to how your kids act during and after engaging. And that could be, watching TV, playing video games, or hanging out online. And ask the questions, do they seem more easily irritable, aggressive, disconnected? Do they appear unable to initiate play anymore? Like they're having trouble identifying tangible activities like coloring or building or assembling things. They're not able to look around and pick up toys off the shelf anymore. Are they having trouble with creative thinking? Do they seem to struggle with interacting socially with others or engaging in conversation with others? And then all of these might be an indicator that the screen time has had a negative impact on the child. Now, if you're not seeing many of these behaviors, and perhaps they're spending a lot of time in the content creation category, then you may be within reason. Screen time is certainly not bad, but you may be within reasonable amounts of screen time and consumption, and reasonable types of screen time consumption, because with supervision and with instruction, access to screens and technology really can be a valuable learning tool. And in fact, you'll see that as we move forward, there's quite a few resources online that can be used specifically in helping with academic regression and remediation. But there is most certainly a caregiver or parental supervision component required. And so I won't go into great detail here, but we'll just highlight again some really helpful resources. Healthychildren.org has an online media plan that you can fill out, and it's a family media plan. And so that means not only are you giving consideration or making recommendations on what the amount of screen time the child engages in, you're even putting that through the lens of your own screen time use and cell phone access and those sorts of things. Again, Common Sense Media has a family tech planner, and it's divided by age groups where you could actually go in. And if you have the foundation for this discussion, I would encourage, going through this with your partner or caregiver or whomever shares parenting roles with you. And then once you make the plan together, then you discuss that with the entire family. I do want to say, you can always, I've heard the term unring the bell. So let's say, at this point, your child has unlimited access to screen time, but you can always make changes to any environment or behavior with a child. Typically, a child who doesn't have any behavior concerns or problems will take up to 2 weeks to establish a new routine. So might be really difficult for a couple weeks, but a child is capable of an expectation or environmental change. A child with a behavior challenge or a learning difference that specifically impacts behavioral functioning. It could take up to a month or 6 weeks. And so, of course, be patient with that process. It takes a whole lot of discipline and commitment on the part of the caregiver. But if you are at a place where there is the absence of any sort of structure in this particular area, you can certainly scale that back a little if that is how you, if you so choose or prefer. These two videos, these were actually presented within here at the Center for Learning Disabilities by a technology director for a large school district in the West Texas area. And again, it just really valuable. I highly recommend to watch. And he goes into much greater detail than I have today. And he specifically talks about, again, as if we didn't have enough to navigate in parenting in our physical world and the virtual realm. We're also supposed to be technology experts and know how to use all the different device settings in order to set screen time parameters. And that can just be completely overwhelming. And so he offers a lot of tools specific to Apple products and how to set limits on those devices using the actual technology to set the limit. And then Microsoft products can be managed through something called Family Link. And so there's some tips there on how to do that. So moving on from screen time, but continuing our discussion about behavior management during the summer. Set expectations for the setting your child will be in most often during the summer, whether that's your home, a neighbor's house, a family member's house. If your child is receiving childcare, outside of the home setting, then oftentimes this will be taken care of for them. But again, this is another one of those significant shifts for the student. They had expectations at school, and those were predictable and comfortable and reliable. And they knew this is how I'm supposed to behave in the hallway, or this is how I'm supposed to behave in the classroom with my teacher. And then a shift to a home environment where there potentially are not any clearly set expectations can be really unsettling and anxiety provoking. So these are just a few recommendations on setting expectations. Determine 3 to 5. And these can, I say, non-negotiables. So this doesn't have to be lengthy. I've posted a few visual examples here of cute ways that families have done this, but I would say these are ones that are must occur. If you set up 8 to 10 different rules, so really be hard to actually follow those and implement those. So no more than 5, probably 3 will take care of it. For example, they might be, and this is for any age group, use safe hands, use kind words, be responsible for yourself. Those are large general buckets in which we can fit a lot of things. Make sure that they are critical and make sure that they're measurable. And then once you've determined what they will be, actually communicate those, share those as a family. These are the family expectations for the summer. And then post them just like teachers do in a classroom, which feels a little bit odd at our home, but post them where the child can see them so that you will be able to use those or you or your caregiver will be able to use those as a reminder in the future. Also, make sure your expectations communicate what the child can do, not what they cannot do. Especially, we've gotten through the excitement and the high of June, and the novelty of all of this uninterrupted time together is wearing off, and we're exhausted. And quite frankly, we're probably looking for kids to potentially return back to school. And so the immediate parental instinct would be to say, well, don't do that and don't do that, and it just turns into an exhausting day for both you and the child. And so try to use positive language that communicates, if for the child, if they can't do this, what can they do? What behavior do I want to see? And so once your expectations have been established, Then, just like you're seeing teachers do in the classroom, there should be a positive behavior reinforcement plan. How am I going to ensure or reinforce that this behavior continues to occur? And so determine in advance, also back when you decided this is what the expectations are going to be, determine how you're going to reinforce them. How will the child be rewarded for following the household expectations? Clearly communicate the reward to the child, and then look hard and be diligent about rewarding and praising that desired behavior immediately, if at all possible. And then ignore the undesired behavior unless it's a non-negotiable. So again, back to those, be kind, use safe hands, be responsible for yourself. So if there's little minor things going on, if at all possible, try to ignore those so that you can use your mental and emotional energy for acknowledging, praising, and rewarding the desired behavior, that what they can do. And I've provided a few examples of household reward systems. In fact, this first one is one that I have a fourth grade and first grade aged sons, and we use these punch cards frequently. That's our home reward system, and then they're able to exchange them for them. It's Pokemon cards, because that's the big thing right now. But they can exchange those for a couple dollars or a trip to get ice cream, or you predetermine what they're going to be able to exchange. But it's a token reward system, right? And here, another way to do that is through, sometimes I've seen pom-pom buckets used. Elementary educators always have a ton of great ideas for those. You could set up a summer bucket list schedule at the start of the summer that says, after we get this many punch cards, we're going to go to the splash pad, or after we get this many punch cards, we get to go get, to Bahama Bugs, to the snow cone, whatever it may be. You could also use that if you do have screen time parameters in place. You cannot use that as a way to earn additional screen time as a baseline, especially if they're used to using screen time. I'd allow them to have like they know they're going to get 30 minutes or an hour a day, but then for good behavior or for additional chores or that sort of thing, they can exchange those for another 15 minutes or another 30 minutes on their device. And then in addition to determining behavior management, and talking about what the expectations are going to be and how those expectations are going to be rewarded, another key recommendation is to establish a predictable routine. One of the hardest parts of summer for both children and parents is the change in routine and lack of predictability. Like for me personally, we've been used to dropping kids off at 7:30 in the morning, and I'm headed to the office at 8, and we're away from each other for the entire day. And then I pick them up, and we have the usual evening routine and activities, and then go to bed at 8 o'clock, right? And it's all very predictable and reliable for not only the kids, but for me. And the unstructured time of summer can be really challenging because we've all been so used to the predictability and routine of an academic school year, and especially for students with learning differences who rely and their functional behavior is dependent upon predictability. The summer can be really hard. And so it is important that you determine a summer routine and communicate that summer routine with the child in advance. So determine what your daily schedule will look like. And that again may not be with you. Maybe, there's a different summer camp each week, or we're at grandparents' house one week and a neighbor's house the next week, or they're going to a child care center, whatever it looks like, still establish some sort of routine and communicate what that is with the child. Although it is very hard, I would still encourage, both one of the joys, but difficulties of summer is the ability to perhaps, we go to bed later because it's really light outside, 9:30, we're still seeing daylight outside, and then we wake up earlier, and it all just starts to feel rather unpredictable and can be anxiety provoking for the child. So if at all possible, like at least on your, similar to what you did during a regular school year, at least on your weekends, okay, we're gonna go to bed at 9 now, and it doesn't have to look exactly like the school year did. We're gonna go to bed at 9 now and wake up at 8 a.m., but have some sort of expected routine and predictability for the student during the summertime. And just like you did with the expectations, go ahead and post the regular schedule and write it down, post it in a centrally located place in your home so that students are used to this. So they've been getting all school year long, and then that way that they have the same predictability when they're outside that classroom or school setting. And then be gracious with both the child and yourself, and be flexible when needed. So, there's times that you just all did want to stay up till 10 o'clock at night, or somebody came into town, or we're traveling for that week. And that is, again, one of the joys of summer, and that's quite okay. But be willing to be flexible. Once you get that schedule set, don't be so rigid that you can't veer from it. And then if there's an expected change in routine, communicate that ahead of time so that the child can anticipate it. And perhaps most importantly of all of these is set a time aside for your own self-care, especially if you are the primary caregiver through the summer. And so some examples that you might use, have a partner or family member or friend or neighbor to help you get a break. Maybe somebody's going to take their kids over to their house for 2 hours on Tuesday, and then the following Tuesday you take their kids for a couple hours. You can use the schedule to your advantage for creating quiet time and self-care time for yourself. Start the day with the more engaging, attention-demanding activities where you're fully there playing and outside and interacting with the kid, and use the afternoon when everybody's starting to get a little bit more tired of one another for quiet time. Maybe that's the time when the child can sit down and watch TV, or they can color or do something more paper-based where there's not as much activity, which gives you the opportunity to either take care of some of the things that you're used to being able to do while a child is at school, or read a book or engage in some sort of quiet time or self-care yourself. But don't forget to take care of yourselves, especially if you are the caregiver. And then finally, I want to move into academic resources that I hope will be tools that you can use later, that you can just come back to this PowerPoint presentation and access some of these links. This first one are resources for reading. Many of these y'all may be familiar with because they're tools that your child's school is already using. The first three do require minimal cost for membership, but most likely your students already have accounts through their school. And so I would recommend and schools can help facilitate access to these accounts through the summer. So ask now and these are reading. So if you're wanting your child to be able to, have their Epic account or their Raz Kids or whatever it may be that they're already using technology-based as a reading support resource, go ahead and ask your teacher what that is and ask for their username and password, and if they can have access through the summer. And they might even have to do it for whatever grade level they're going into, but they should be receptive to helping support you with that continuing online access. I will note as an aside here, I talked about the critical need for extended school year services for students receiving special ed services. In contrast, if you have a student who perhaps is receiving special ed services or gifted and talented services, it is a state requirement that schools based in the state of Texas are offering extra enrichment resources or potential activities or camps for students who receive gifted and talented services. And so if you're not receiving notifications about that as well, ask your school now before we're out here in the next 3 weeks. I really like if you're not familiar with them, the University of Florida Literacy Institute has a wealth of reading resources that are highly supportive of our students with dyslexia. And so there are links here to a lot of and they are free. There's a parent resource hub, a digital word work. It's, like a interactive board that they can do on a tablet. And then there's a whole text guide on decodable text. As you well may know, students with dyslexia, especially those early childhood and elementary age, have much greater success in reading gains when they're receiving instruction and or reading within decodable text versus leveled readers. And again, I'm going to run out of time, so I can't go into great detail about that. But if you click here, there's an extensive Excel spreadsheet of decodable text that you could use to help support your child's reading through the summer. And if you aren't able to access some of these more academically oriented resources, just read with your child, read with them, read to them, ask them to read to you. No matter the age, the reading can be shared with even junior high and high school students. And studies show, there's clearly evidence for just the engagement with text having positive effects on addressing the potential for academic regression over the summer break. And then this is a great list of some online programs for math and games. And most of these, I think other than Prodigy, if I'm quoting accurately, are free to access. And so if you're looking for some math tools that would help with continued intervention and remediation, I highly recommend those. And then, kids need continued access to hands-on activities. And so I've provided here, these next several slides are honestly just a lot of experiences that I'm sharing from my own personal experience and time spent with children at home in the summer with me. But what I do want to emphasize is it is critical that the child has the opportunity to explore, be active, physically active, and engage with someone, whether that be their peers through play dates or camps, or perhaps other adults or yourself. They have been rigorously challenged for, at minimum, 7 hours a day over the last 9 months. And so extended time alone without peer or human engagement, or extended periods without intellectually stimulating activity, will increase the probability of regression. And if you're already starting to read through this list, you can see, none of it is particularly creative or necessarily an aha activity. It's simple things that you can do, but you'll note the common theme here is that in all of these activities, the child has the opportunity to explore, be active, and engage. Some of my favorites on the list, summer reading programs, our public libraries, or if you're close to a university-based library, are phenomenal resources during the summer. They have the reading programs that are motivational in terms of rewards for the child to continue reading. And then oftentimes they have weekly, if not more than one activity per week that parents can bring children to. You're typically expected to stay with them, but bring children to without charge. And all of those are hands-on and intellectually stimulating. And then just simple things, like take the opportunity to grow things at home, get outside for a walk together, take a family bike ride, go for a picnic, get out and go swimming on those hot days. Again, just seek to engage, explore, and be active. And then play board games with your child, or have board games available, or card games for their caretakers. Or if you're trying to discern and determine if this would be a good setting for your child to be at through the summer, start looking around, like what kind of things do they do? Are they engaging in board games or card games? There are measurable cognitive benefits to playing board or card-based games, both with others and even independently for your child. And you can see some of those listed here, the different critical thinking and problem-solving skills that engagement in board or card-based games provides for your child. These board-based games, and again, I've just listed some that are fairly common and we see in our house a whole lot, but they do have direct alignment to the cognitive areas known as the G's, or those general intellectual ability. There's direct relationship to the parts of the brain that these games stimulate and those cognitive and academic areas that are assessed as part of educational evaluations. And so I think that's highly fascinating, but also just evidence of the benefits of engagement in these games. So these strategy games, and these lists are certainly not exhaustive. You all may already have family favorites or have seen more extensive lists that are great resources for you. But the strategy games, those specifically increase fluid reasoning, working memory, short-term and long-term retrieval, and processing speed. All of these likely terms that you're recognizing from your child's IEP meetings or review of evaluations. The quantitative games promote math computation, math problem skill, and visual spatial reasoning. And all of these games require that your child read in a play-based format. And then here are some card games that are favorites at our house if you're looking for ideas. And then finally, because I'm going to run out of time to allow you all to ask any questions if you have them, but give the child an opportunity to create. I've again provided some examples here that are favorites in our house, but some I'd like to highlight are, like Legos, Magnetiles. We're all ordering from Amazon constantly. When the box comes, get the stuff out and just throw it into the living room or the child's room and see what they do with it later, or let them have a collection of boxes. Art-based activities like coloring, painting, fine motor skill-based activities is like this string art, cross stitch, sewing looms. Again, there you may already have favorites that you like as a family. And if you don't have access or these types of games, or not games, but hands-on activities in your home, most local libraries have materials like this available that you could either go up to the library and use for the afternoon, and many of them have them available for you to check out. But the key piece here, again, is giving them the opportunity to intellectually engage and create. So again, I hope that you are able to use these links and resources, that this will be more of a summer catalog that you can refer back to as you prepare and progress through the summer transition. I'm always happy to assist with additional resources or answer any questions that you might have.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Simmons. Such a wonderful wealth of information and resources. If you are joining us on Zoom and you have a question for Dr. Simmons, if you would put that in the Q&A box, we'll be sure and grab that. And if you're joining us on Facebook, you can put it in the comments section. So we do have one question in the Q&A box. Somebody just asked, what are your thoughts on giving your children unlimited screen time on weekends? So what are your thoughts about screen time limits?
And I first would again refer you, whatever slide that was that talks that there are separate presentations on managing screen time, and they're divided by early childhood and teens. I would if you have questions about screen time, I would strongly encourage you to go back and not even watch those. You could play them, like a podcast. But kids are most successful when screen time is supported, monitored, and shared, and when it is aligned with content creation versus just consumption. So in order to meet those criteria, it is going to require some parameters and supervision that might not necessarily be unlimited.
Absolutely. And I noticed that Chelsea put those links again for those 2 videos on managing screen time in the chat box. Okay, great question. We have a question from somebody. Are students that are served under Section 504 eligible for extended school year services?
So extended school year service consideration and planning is not required is not legally required in the development of a 504 plan. However, I do think that it would be appropriate at your child's 504 meeting to ask for recommendations or support, especially regarding some of those academic resources I talked about. You could just say, I'm concerned that my child is at greater risk for academic regression over the summer. And so are there any specific resources or program things that you're doing with the child in the classroom right now that I could help continue to support over the summer?
Absolutely. I don't see any other questions. We'll give a minute. I've gotten lots of parents and professionals saying thank you for all of this information. So great information. A reminder, if you've got questions, if you'll put those in the Q&A box, we'll catch those. And if you're joining us on Facebook, you can put it in the comments. We did have some comments on Facebook. Just great job. Thank you for the information. Okay, we do have a question that just popped up. Somebody asked what your thoughts were on continuing to do tutoring during the summer versus taking a break.
And my follow-up question to that would be, what type of tutoring is going on? And so that may be one, but overall, general recommendation would be, especially if it is a TEA dyslexia handbook compliant tutoring program where your child is receiving dyslexia academic language therapy services, I would recommend continuing with the integrity of the program because that, the implementation with fidelity is what leads to quality results for the child with academic language therapy and dyslexia-based programs. If it's tutoring that is supporting perhaps assignments and activities that are going on in the just regular classroom, it's not a highly regimented or structured delivery of academic services, then it might be something where, yeah, you can, give the child a break. Or maybe if you're still wanting to use the tutor, the format of the time that the child's spending with the tutor becomes, like I was talking about, a little more play-based or enrichment-based, where, they're reading together, they're doing some of these board games, but something that doesn't feel quite so emotionally or mentally taxing for the student.
Absolutely. And they did clarify they were looking at general tutoring for an elementary age student with autism.
Right. And so on the general tutoring, I think that you could, again, with your own discretion, follow the guidance of, what's the tutor's recommendation based on what they're seeing, and then what has the tutor been working on. And if it's all pretty specific to classroom assignments and helping ensure progress on classroom assignments or homework, then again, that might be a place where you can pull back a little so that the student feels like that they're getting a break from the extra activities.
Absolutely. Let's see if we have any more questions. I'm not seeing any more questions on Facebook, just some great thank yous for the information, seeing lots of thank yous, great information in the chat as well. So I don't see any other questions. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. As a reminder, we are recording today, and so that recording will be available for you. Let me share my screen again. There we go. All right. So again, just want to say thank you for joining us. We're so glad to have you take time and join. And Dr. Simmons, thank you so much for this wealth of information that we can share out to help us make it through those summer months. And so again, we are recording the webinar. The recording will be available on our website at prntexas.org, and on our Facebook page. You can look up PRN Texas there. If you are needing a certificate of attendance for today, you will be receiving an email to say thank you for attending the webinar. You can follow the link in that email and get your certificate of attendance. This wraps up our series of webinars for the spring. And so please be sure and check back on our website and our Facebook page for our webinars that will be coming in the fall. And so on the screen, I'm going to share our contact information. So the contact information for our Director of Statewide Services, Christina, our support specialist, Chelsea, and myself is there. Please be sure again and check out our website. We have got upcoming events in your local regions, as well as lots of information for parents. And like and follow us on social media on Facebook and Twitter. So thank you again for joining us. Let's just check one more time and see if there's anything. So just more thank yous for great resources. And so again, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to have you join us, Dr. Simmons, and we love having you share your wealth of knowledge with us. And so thank you all for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful end to your school year and a wonderful summer.
Yeah, thank you all. Best wishes for an enjoyable summer.
Yes, absolutely. Same to you. Thank you. Bye.